The moving truck pulled away from the curb, leaving me alone in the driveway of my new home. 3 years of saving every extra dollar had finally paid off. My dream house stood before me. 3 bedrooms, a spacious yard that caught the afternoon sun perfectly, and soon, the swimming pool I had fantasized about since childhood. I took a deep breath of suburban air and smiled. My first week in Oak Ridge Estates had been pleasant enough. Mrs. Jenkins from across the street brought over a banana bread and a handwritten note with the garbage collection schedule. The Thompsons next door invited me for coffee and shared stories about the neighborhood's annual block party. Everyone seemed friendly and welcoming. I felt I had made the right choice, despite stretching my budget to the absolute limit. On Saturday morning, as I planted new rose bushes along my front walkway, a shadow fell across the garden bed. I looked up to see a woman in her 50s with immaculately styled blonde hair and a cream-colored pantsuit. She held a thick binder with the letters HOA embossed on the cover. "You must be our newest resident." Her smile did not reach her eyes. "I am Patricia Harrington, president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association." I stood and wiped my hands on my jeans, extending one to shake. "Nice to meet you. I am Alex Morgan." Patricia glanced at my dirt-covered hand and did not take it. Instead, she opened her binder. "I see you are making some changes to the exterior appearance of your property." "Just some flowers," I replied, confused by her formal tone. "I notice you have selected crimson blush roses. Our bylaws specify that all rose varieties must remain under 24 inches at maturity. These will grow to 26. She produced a ruler from her bag and measured one of my newly planted bushes, already exceeding regulations by 2 inches. I blinked in surprise. I had no idea there were rules about flower height. "And your mailbox," she gestured toward the street. "Eggshell white is not on the approved color palette. The HOA only permits alabaster mist or gentle dawn for mailboxes." My confusion must have shown on my face because Patricia handed me a 60-page document. The complete bylaws. I recommend familiarizing yourself with them immediately. The violation notice period is 7 days. As she walked away, I stood holding the binder, wondering if she was joking. She was not. 2 weeks later, I attended my first HOA meeting, excited to present my county-approved pool plans. I had spent months working with a reputable pool company, ensuring everything met local building codes. The blueprints were beautiful, a kidney-shaped oasis that would transform my backyard into a private retreat. The meeting proceeded normally until my item came up on the agenda. Patricia's demeanor changed instantly as she pulled out my submission. "We have concerns about the proposed pool installation at 42 Oak Ridge Drive," she announced to the room. Her voice carried an authority that silenced the casual chatter. "But the county already approved everything," I responded, confused. Patricia smiled thinly. "The county may have approved it, but the HOA has final say on all external modifications." She flipped to a page in her binder that I had never seen before. "According to our pool coverage regulations, all pools must have appropriate coverings when not in active use." The homeowner beside me whispered, "That is a new one." Patricia continued as if she had not heard him. "For safety and aesthetic purposes, a proper pool cover will be required." I watched in disbelief as she distributed copies of this apparent new rule to board members who looked equally surprised. The room fell silent as Patricia's practiced smile never reached her cold eyes. When I looked around for support, I noticed several neighbors avoiding my gaze. Only then did I realize this was the opening move in what would become a neighborhood war, one I had not even known I was fighting. The pool construction began the following month after I scrambled to comply with the seemingly arbitrary pool coverage requirement. The contractors arrived early, their equipment rumbling into my driveway before the neighborhood had fully awakened. As they marked the ground and began excavation, I noticed movement in the second-story window of the house directly behind mine. Patricia stood watching, arms crossed, a displeased expression visible even from a distance. I mentioned this to Marco, the construction foreman, who paused his work to wipe sweat from his brow. "That house belongs to your HOA president," he asked, glancing over his shoulder at Patricia's window. "Yes, have you worked in this neighborhood before?" Marco nodded. 3 other pools last year. Never had an issue with the HOA. Strange she is giving you such a hard time. His comments stayed with me through the day. That evening, I knocked on the door of the previous owners who had relocated just a few streets over. Janet Wilson greeted me warmly and invited me in for iced tea. "How are you settling in?" she asked. "Well enough, though the HOA president seems to have taken a special interest in my property." Janet paused, her glass halfway to her lips. "Patricia giving you trouble already?" "She seems particularly concerned about my pool installation." Janet exchanged looks with her husband Bob. "That is interesting because she was surprisingly accommodating when we lived there. Never once issued us a violation notice, unlike some neighbors who got them weekly." Bob set down his glass. "You know what is different? Your pool." "You think she has something against pools?" I asked. "No, but she definitely has something for the view," Bob explained. "From her second floor, our backyard provided a clear view of Hillside Ridge. Patricia used to comment on how lovely it was to see the sunset over the hills from her home office." A piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My pool would interrupt her scenic vista. The next day, driven by curiosity and growing suspicion, I visited the county record's office. After explaining my situation to the clerk, an elderly man named Walter, he disappeared into the archives and returned with a dusty file. "Patricia Harrington has quite a history with your street," Walter said, opening the folder. "When the developers first proposed the expansion of Oak Ridge Estates 15 years ago, she filed multiple petitions against it." "Against my house specifically?" "Against that entire section. Look here." He slid a faded photograph across the desk. "This was taken from her property line before your street was developed." The photo revealed a stunning panorama of rolling hills, trees, and distant mountains, a postcard-worthy view that was now partially blocked by my house. The pool installation would further obstruct what remained of her precious vista. "She fought hard to preserve that view," Walter confided. "Lost the battle against development but has been fighting small wars ever since." Over the next 2 weeks, violation notices appeared in my mailbox with alarming frequency. My garden hose was unapproved forest green rather than the regulation woodland green. My solar lights were angled incorrectly, at 15 degrees instead of the mandated 20. My wind chimes were unauthorized. Each notice bore Patricia's signature, and each targeted only my property. One afternoon, while walking my neighborhood with camera in hand, I documented identical violations at other homes. 17 garden hoses in various shades of green, 23 incorrectly angled solar lights, and 9 sets of wind chimes. None had received notices. The community picnic in the park provided further confirmation of Patricia's agenda. As I approached the dessert table, I overheard her speaking to a group of neighbors. "Pools are dangerous eyesores," she declared emphatically. "They decrease property values and attract unwanted elements to the neighborhood." Several homeowners nodded politely, though I caught sympathetic glances thrown my way. These people were not allies of Patricia. They were simply too intimidated to speak against her. That night, I spread the HOA bylaws across my dining table, determined to find some way to protect my investment. For hours, I pored over the dense legal text, my eyes burning from the strain. Just as I was about to give up, a passage caught my attention. Article 7, Section 3, regarding property modifications and aesthetic consistency. The clause stated that homeowners must maintain aesthetic harmony with surrounding properties, but also that functional modifications serving the primary property use are permitted provided they comply with safety standards and do not substantially impair neighboring property enjoyment. I read the words again, slowly, as a plan began forming in my mind. If Patricia wanted my pool covered, I would comply, but in a way she never anticipated. That provision about property modifications might provide precisely the leverage I desperately needed to reclaim my home. Monday morning found me in the cluttered office of Bernard Michaels, an attorney specializing in homeowner association disputes. His desk overflowed with similar cases, testament to the surprising frequency of neighborhood conflicts escalating to legal intervention. So she implemented this pool coverage requirement immediately after you submitted your plans? Bernard asked, adjusting his reading glasses as he reviewed my documents. Yes, and I have confirmed with other pool owners that this rule was never enforced before me. Bernard leaned back in his chair. Technically, they can mandate a pool cover, he explained thoughtfully. HOAs have broad discretionary powers regarding exterior appearances, but their enforcement must be consistent and reasonable. And selectively targeting just my property is neither, I added. Precisely, Bernard nodded. However, proving discriminatory enforcement requires documentation and time. My advice would be to temporarily comply while we build our case. I frowned, so just give in. Consider its strategic positioning, Bernard corrected with a slight smile. Sometimes apparent surrender creates the best opportunity for a decisive victory. The next day, I contacted the pool company and ordered the standard green tarp cover Patricia had passive-aggressively suggested during our last encounter. When it arrived, I made sure to install it precisely according to HOA specifications, even inviting Patricia to inspect it. She seemed momentarily surprised by my compliance but quickly recovered. I am pleased to see you taking our community standards seriously, she said with that same cold smile. I always strive to be a good neighbor, I replied pleasantly. This superficial surrender bought me precious time. Each evening after work, I photographed every pool in the neighborhood, 27 in total, documenting that none had covers despite the supposedly universal requirement. I collected dates, times, and addresses, building an irrefutable record of selective enforcement. Meanwhile, my deeper research began. If I needed to cover my pool, I would comply in spectacular fashion. I spent hours researching architectural innovations and engineering possibilities. If Patricia wanted a cover, she would get one, but not the kind she expected. I approached 3 architectural firms with my unusual concept. The first 2 architects laughed and declined. The third, a young, innovative designer named Sophia, lit up at the challenge. A fully transparent, reinforced glass pool cover, she repeated, already sketching possibilities. Unusual but structurally sound if engineered correctly. It would need specialized glass, custom supporting framework. Cost is not my primary concern, I told her. Sophia looked up from her drawing. This is about more than pool safety, is not it? I smiled. Let us just say I am passionate about both compliance and aesthetics. While Sophia developed the technical specifications, I consulted with a local security expert about another concerning matter: Patricia's constant surveillance of my property. From what you have described, her behavior constitutes a privacy violation, the consultant confirmed, particularly photographing your property without consent. That falls under state harassment statutes. He helped me position security cameras to document Patricia's monitoring activities. Within days, we had collected numerous instances of her watching my property from her window, taking photographs, and even entering my yard while I was at work to inspect perceived violations. The most crucial element came together when Sophia presented her final designs. The reinforced glass panels would be strong enough to support substantial weight while remaining completely transparent. More intriguing were the optical properties of the specialized glass. The panels have subtle prismatic elements, Sophia explained. When sunlight hits at the correct angle, they create refraction patterns, essentially rainbows, given the positioning of your pool relative to the sun's path. She indicated on the blueprint where these refractions would project, directly onto Patricia's home office window during her preferred working hours. Is that an intentional feature? Sophia asked with a knowing smile. Let us call it an aesthetic enhancement, I replied. As I approved the final designs and placed the order for materials, I felt a sense of anticipation building. The pieces of my response were falling into place, a magnificent puzzle of malicious compliance that would soon transform this neighborhood dispute into something Patricia never anticipated. The law was on my side, the bylaws were on my side, and soon the neighbors would be too. The installation day arrived with perfect timing, a clear Tuesday in June, when Patricia had specifically scheduled her weekly garden club meeting at her house. The gathering would provide an ideal audience for what was about to unfold. At precisely 7:00 a.m., the earliest time permitted for construction noise according to HOA bylaws, 4 contractors, an engineer, and a county inspector converged on my property. The specialized glass panels had arrived the previous evening, each custom cut and tested to exceed safety requirements by triple the standard margin. "You sure about this?" asked Hank, the lead contractor, as his team unloaded the first massive panel. "Never installed anything like this before." "I am absolutely certain," I replied, noting movement in the curtains of Patricia's window. "Just make sure everything is done exactly to code." The county inspector, clipboard in hand, scrutinized the engineering plans. Interesting design choice, but as long as it meets safety standards, the county has no objection. By mid-morning, a small crowd of curious neighbors had gathered along my fence line. The installation process was fascinating to watch. The precision placement of support structures, the careful lowering of each glass panel into position. The transparent cover began taking shape across my entire pool, creating a stunning visual effect while fully complying with Patricia's demanded, complete coverage. Patricia's garden club meeting had moved outside to her patio, ostensibly to enjoy the weather but clearly to observe the unusual construction. I could hear their whispers and occasional gasps as the cover took form. At 11:30 a.m., the installation team positioned the final panel, the one with the most pronounced prismatic properties. As they secured it in place, the sun reached the perfect angle. Suddenly, brilliant rainbows scattered across Patricia's white stucco house, dancing across her windows and painting her pristine walls with vibrant colors. The effect was instant and dramatic. Several garden club members audibly gasped. One woman began recording video with her phone. Patricia stood frozen, teacup suspended midair, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. At 12:42 precisely, I noted the time for my documentation. Patricia's back door flew open. She stormed toward my property line, HOA rulebook clutched in her white-knuckled grip. Her garden club members followed at a discreet distance, unwilling to miss the confrontation. "What is the meaning of this?" Patricia demanded, her practiced composure crumbling. I smiled pleasantly. "Good afternoon, Patricia. Is something wrong?" This, she sputtered, gesturing wildly at the transparent cover. "This is not what the board intended." "The bylaws specified a pool cover," I responded calmly, handing her copies of all permits and approvals. "They did not specify opacity." The county inspector stepped forward. "All installations are up to code, ma'am. The structural integrity actually exceeds requirements by 340%. Patricia flipped frantically through her rulebook. "But the purpose of a cover is to prevent accidents and maintain aesthetic standards," I finished for her. "This cover is actually safer than standard models. As for aesthetics," I gestured to the gathered neighbors who were clearly impressed by the installation. "The community response seems positive." One of Patricia's own garden club members betrayed her with an enthusiastic, "It is absolutely beautiful." Patricia shot the woman a look that could have frozen lava. Then she turned back to me. "The HOA will not accept this." "On what grounds?" I asked innocently. "I have complied with every regulation. The cover is properly installed, certified safe, and approved by the county. If you have specific bylaws prohibiting transparent pool covers, I would be happy to review them." We both knew no such bylaws existed. The gathering neighbors whispered among themselves, a few nodding appreciatively at my solution. More importantly, I noticed two HOA board members in the crowd exchanging concerned glances. Patricia was losing her audience. "This is not over," Patricia hissed before turning on her heel. "Actually, there is one more thing you should know," I called after her. "The specialized glass contains UV filtering properties, very environmentally conscious. The HOA is environmentally conscious, is it not?" Patricia did not respond. She retreated to her home, phone already pressed to her ear, undoubtedly summoning an emergency HOA meeting. The rainbow reflections followed her all the way to her door. As the installation crew packed up their equipment, neighbors I had barely spoken to approached with congratulations and questions about the innovative design. "Never seen anything like it," commented Mr. Rodriguez from 2 doors down. "Cost a fortune, I bet." "Worth every penny," I replied. "She has been pulling this kind of stuff for years," confided another neighbor, glancing nervously toward Patricia's house. "Nobody has ever stood up to her quite like this." By evening, word had spread throughout Oak Ridge Estates. 3 different neighbors texted me photos of Patricia marching door to door with petition in hand, apparently trying to gather support for an emergency bylaw amendment. From my patio, I watched the sunset reflect off my new pool cover, creating a spectacular light display across my backyard. For the first time since moving in, I felt truly at home. The battle had escalated, but for the first time, I held the strategic high ground, quite literally, with my gleaming glass pool cover reflecting Patricia's own tactics back at her. That night, I received notice of an emergency HOA meeting scheduled for Thursday evening. The agenda listed one item: discussion of aesthetic standards for pool coverings. The game was not over, but I was now playing with a considerably stronger hand. The community center parking lot overflowed on Thursday evening. Cars lined the adjacent street, a clear indicator that this would be no ordinary HOA meeting. As I entered the building, I noticed something unprecedented. Residents were actually showing up. Normally, HOA meetings attracted only board members and perhaps a handful of concerned homeowners. Tonight, it seemed the entire neighborhood had turned out. Inside, the room buzzed with unprecedented attendance. Patricia had labeled the meeting addressing aesthetic violations, but everyone knew the true agenda. She stood at the front, arranging papers with sharp, agitated movements. Chairs scraped against linoleum as neighbors chose sides, physically positioning themselves in a way that made the divide obvious. Most of the newer residents sat on my side of the room, while Patricia's longtime allies clustered protectively near her. At precisely 7:00 p.m., Patricia called the meeting to order. Her opening statement had clearly been rehearsed. Oak Ridge Estates has maintained its property values through consistent enforcement of aesthetic standards, she began, her voice carrying a practiced tone of authority. Recent developments threaten the visual harmony our community has worked so hard to establish. For the next 15 minutes, Patricia delivered what could only be described as a presentation on community standards and neighborhood unity. Though her specific complaints about losing her restful view revealed her true motivation. Pool coverings are intended to be unobtrusive, she emphasized, not attention-grabbing installations that create visual disruption. The meeting shifted when Patricia presented hastily drafted amendments prohibiting transparent or reflective pool coverings and requiring all covers to be solid, non-reflective material in approved earth tones. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Everyone recognized this amendment for what it was, a targeted attack on my specific installation. The board will now hear comments before voting, Patricia announced, clearly expecting limited opposition. I rose slowly, connecting my laptop to the projector the board used for their presentations. I have prepared some relevant information for consideration. Patricia frowned. This is highly irregular. We do not typically allow visual presentations during comment periods. Actually, interjected Mrs. Gonzalez, a board member seated to Patricia's right, the bylaws place no restrictions on resident presentations during open comment. Please proceed. I displayed my first slide, a comprehensive timeline documenting Patricia's selective enforcement. Photographs of 27 uncovered pools in the neighborhood, copies of violation notices sent only to my property despite identical conditions elsewhere, and county records of permit approvals. The HOA exists to maintain community standards, I stated calmly, not to preserve private views at the expense of individual homeowners. The most damning evidence came next. A compilation of photographs showing Patricia herself using my backyard space as a viewing corridor before I purchased the property. The time-stamped images showed her repeatedly standing at the property line, sometimes with camera in hand, documenting the view she felt entitled to preserve. These photographs were provided by the previous owners, I explained. They demonstrate a pattern of behavior that preceded my purchase of the property. The room fell silent as I advanced to the final slide. The relevant HOA bylaws highlighting the requirements for consistency in enforcement and the absence of any prohibition against transparent safety covers. When I finished, 3 other homeowners stepped forward with similar stories. Martin Jensen from Oak Lane revealed how his garden shed approval was blocked 6 times until he relocated it to preserve Patricia's sightlines. Each time I submitted the plans, there was a new objection, Martin explained, until finally I moved it to the one spot that did not block her view. Sarah Chen described how her request to plant a privacy hedge was denied 3 times without explanation, while identical hedges were approved for other properties that did not impact Patricia's scenic vista. Patricia's face had transformed from confident authority to barely controlled fury. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled slightly. "These accusations are groundless. Every decision has been based purely on maintaining property values and community standards." "Then you will not object to a review of all enforcement actions over the past 5 years?" asked Mrs. Gonzalez, the board member who had supported my presentation. That would be an unnecessary use of board resources," Patricia stammered. The meeting adjourned without resolution after nearly 3 hours of increasingly heated discussion. No vote was taken on the proposed amendment. A procedural technicality raised by another board member had tabled it for further legal review. In the parking lot afterward, neighbors who had never spoken to me approached with handshakes and whispered support. "Been wanting to add a pergola for years, but never bothered trying," confided one man. "Maybe now there is hope." Most significantly, I noticed the once unified HOA board now showed visible fractures. As Patricia attempted to gather her allies for a post-meeting strategy session, 2 members publicly declined, citing prior commitments. The community had witnessed something they had never seen before, someone successfully challenging Patricia's authority. The balance of power had begun to shift, and everyone felt it. What I did not anticipate was Patricia's next move. Rather than retreat, she would escalate beyond the HOA's authority, taking our neighborhood dispute to the county level. The real battle was just beginning. The certified letter arrived exactly as my lawyer predicted it would. Bernard had warned me that Patricia was not the type to admit defeat. She would simply change battlegrounds. "Complaint of unsafe and unpermitted structure," read the official county letterhead. Patricia had escalated to official channels, claiming my glass pool cover constituted a hazardous installation. The inspection was scheduled for Tuesday morning. "Perfect timing," Bernard said when I called him. "That gives us Monday afternoon to file our countersuit." Monday morning, I met Bernard at the courthouse to sign the final paperwork. Our privacy violation complaint included meticulous documentation, time-stamped photographs of Patricia surveilling my property, testimony from previous owners about her trespassing to preserve her view, and the technical specifications proving my glass cover exceeded all safety requirements by 340%. "Is a countersuit really necessary?" I asked, still uncomfortable with the escalation despite everything Patricia had done. Bernard looked at me over his reading glasses. "When someone abuses the system to harass you, sometimes the only language they understand is legal consequences. This is not about revenge. It is about establishing boundaries." Tuesday morning arrived with perfect weather for an inspection. The county inspector, a weather-worn man named Frank who looked to be nearing retirement, arrived precisely at 9:00 a.m. He wore a worn county uniform and carried a clipboard with what appeared to be decades of inspection stickers layered on its back. "So this is the controversial pool cover I have been hearing about," Frank said, circling the installation with professional interest. 27 years inspecting pools, and this is definitely a first." He spent 15 minutes taking measurements, checking load-bearing capacity, and reviewing the installation documentation. His thoroughness was reassuring. "Overbuilt, if anything," he remarked, clearly impressed by the engineering. "Could park a truck on this thing if you wanted to." As Frank completed his paperwork, Patricia emerged from her house. She had clearly been watching the inspection from her window and timed her approach to coincide with its conclusion, likely expecting to hear the cover had failed inspection. "I trust you found the numerous safety violations," she asked Frank, not bothering to acknowledge my presence. Frank looked up from his clipboard. "No violations found, ma'am. Installation exceeds all county safety codes." He handed her his official approval notice. "Structure is actually about 3 times stronger than required minimums." Patricia stared at the paper as if it might transform into a different verdict through sheer force of will. But the reflective surface, the visual disruption. "Not my department," Frank replied, already heading back to his vehicle. "I only evaluate structural safety. For what it is worth, my grandkids would love this thing. Nice work," he added with a nod in my direction before driving away. Patricia stood frozen for a moment before turning on her heel without a word and marching back to her house. The tide turned dramatically the following week when 3 HOA board members requested private meetings with me. First came Mrs. Gonzalez, then Mr. Taylor, and finally Mr. Peterson, the treasurer. All 3 expressed the same concern: personal liability. "The board carries insurance," Mr. Peterson explained during our coffee meeting, "but it does not cover actions taken in bad faith or selective enforcement targeting specific homeowners." They were distancing themselves from Patricia's crusade, concerned about the legal implications of what was increasingly appearing to be a case of targeted harassment. Their unease transformed to alarm when my lawyer forwarded copies of Patricia's emails discussing ways to force compliance, specifically from my property. The emails had been obtained through proper legal channels as part of discovery for our countersuit. In one particularly damning message to another board member, Patricia had written, "We need to make an example of the Morgan property. If we allow this pool to proceed without intervention, we lose control of the neighborhood aesthetic I have worked so hard to protect." The HOA's attorney, clearly recognizing the untenable position, contacted Bernard with an initial settlement proposal. The terms acknowledged inconsistent enforcement and offered to grandfather my installation permanently. Additionally, they proposed a revision of enforcement procedures to ensure fairness going forward. "It is a start," Bernard acknowledged when we discussed the offer, "but after months of harassment, merely the beginning of an adequate resolution." My counterproposal included specific protections against future targeting and a mandatory review of all HOA procedures. I also requested a special board election with independent oversight to ensure community representation accurately reflected resident wishes. "The community needs structural change," I explained to Bernard, "not just personal vindication." Patricia made one final desperate attempt to maintain control. She called an emergency board meeting, excluding the 3 members who had met with me. However, without quorum, no official actions could be taken. When news of this unauthorized meeting spread, support for her position collapsed entirely. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks later. The HOA acknowledged inappropriate enforcement actions, agreed to a special election for all board positions, and implemented a new system requiring photographic documentation and multiple board member approval for all violation notices. Most significantly, the agreement established a resident oversight committee to review board decisions upon request, a fundamental change that would prevent any future HOA president from wielding power unchecked. As I signed the final paperwork, I realized this had never really been about a pool cover. It had been about standing up to arbitrary authority and creating lasting change, not just for myself, but for an entire community that had lived too long under Patricia's shadow. Spring arrived with change blossoming throughout the neighborhood. Cherry trees lining Oak Ridge Drive exploded into pink and white clouds, mirroring the transformation taking place in our community governance. The special election for HOA leadership saw unprecedented turnout. 92% of eligible households cast ballots, a stark contrast to previous elections where participation rarely exceeded 15%. Patricia received only 7 votes, presumably her immediate friends and her husband. The new board, led by retired Judge Margaret Williamson, immediately implemented procedural reforms, documented enforcement criteria, mandatory photographic evidence of violations, and quarterly reviews of consistency. Board meetings, once poorly attended affairs held during workday hours, were moved to evenings and live-streamed for residents who could not attend in person. Transparency builds trust, Margaret explained during her first meeting as president, and trust builds community. My pool and its remarkable cover became an unexpected community unifier, a symbol of standing against arbitrary authority. Neighbors who previously avoided confrontation now shared their own stories of intimidation, creating a surprising healing effect throughout our community. The Architectural Review Committee, newly staffed with residents representing various housing styles and areas of the neighborhood, approved 3 innovative projects that would have been unthinkable under the previous regime. Solar roof tiles, a community garden on previously unused common land, and a modern playhouse designed by an architect parent for the neighborhood children. 6 weeks after the election, a familiar sign appeared in front of Patricia's house. The for sale stake drove into the ground with the finality of a gavel striking in judgment. Her departure announcement, published in the community newsletter, cited increasing hostility in the neighborhood atmosphere as her reason for leaving after 17 years. Few attended her goodbye gathering, but nearly everyone came to my inaugural community pool party in late spring. Children laughed as they played games on the glass cover, now featuring a removable section for actual swimming, while adults marveled at the engineering and shared stories of their own battles with the previous HOA regime. One resident, an elderly man who had lived in Oak Ridge Estate since its founding, approached me with tears in his eyes. "For 10 years, I wanted to plant a Japanese maple in my front yard," he told me. "Every request was denied because it was not on the approved plant list. Yesterday, the new committee approved it unanimously. I never thought I would live to see it planted." Margaret raised her lemonade in a quiet toast when Patricia's moving truck finally pulled away on a warm June morning. Most of the neighborhood pretended not to notice, but there was an undeniable sense of collective relief. "To new beginnings," Margaret said, "and to the strength it sometimes takes to create them." The final chapter of this neighborhood transformation came full circle when a young family purchased Patricia's house. They arrived with homemade cookies and genuine smiles to introduce themselves to the community. Their first question, asked with some trepidation, was whether their children could join the newly formed neighborhood swim club. The question brought laughter and immediate welcoming assurances. "Actually," I told them, "your children might particularly enjoy our pool. From your second-floor window, they will have the best view of the glass cover and all the rainbows it creates in the afternoon sun." As summer settled over our transformed community, I realized this ordeal had given me something unexpected. Not just a home with a remarkable pool, but a neighborhood of allies who understood the value of standing together against petty tyranny. The view from Patricia's old house now belonged to children who delighted in the rainbows, rather than a woman who resented change. Sometimes, I reflected, the most effective response to unreasonable authority is not angry confrontation but creative compliance, using the very rules meant to constrain you as the tools for creating positive change. My transparent pool cover had done more than just comply with an arbitrary rule. It had revealed the truth about our community and transformed it in ways I never could have imagined when I first unloaded moving boxes in what has truly become my dream home.